All right, hello, and welcome to another edition of Grown Folks Business on a Thursday, a pretty Thursday evening, a little hot. The pollen's out, my sinuses are kind of telling on me, and that might be a little nasally sound tonight. I tried to do a little nasal spray before we got on here just to open it up, but hey, glad to have some of the usual suspects, as I always say, and a newcomer to the space who is going to, I guess, leave her camera off, but I hope she can chime in from time to time. But there she is. Come on, let's see that face of yours. So, Miss Blackwell, glad you could join us. Oh, she's mobile. That might be the problem. I think she's in a car. But Lisa, glad to have you in the space. Gregory and Julia, Meryl, the CEO, and of course Bob, one of the mainstays and most consistent people to be here. But we catch them when we catch them, and these folks here on this in this space greatly appreciate it. Thanks for joining us, Miss G. I don't want to butcher your name. I know how that feels. My name is always butchered, so I appreciate you being in the space. You do participate that way, and I thank you. If you don't know, tonight's topic is something to be expected from someone like myself, who's a historian. But it's why our collective history matters more now than ever. Collective history, to just unpack that a little, is the whole. It's every aspect of who we are as individuals and who we are collectively. The good, bad, ugly. Uh, Context matters. You guys know I say that a lot. Context matters about a lot of things, but when it comes to history, especially when you think of it collectively, not just Black history or American history or the highlights, no, the lowlights as well. Everything, the collective is critically important. Uh, in my observation and experience, it's the only way we get better. It's the only way we truly make progress. Is to be acknowledging um, how critical our collective history is to us being better. Um, so I have a clip that I want to play, and I'm trying to decide when I should play it. And I think it should come after we unpack this topic a little bit. I'm going to go with that. The clip is actually of a wonderful historian named John Hope Franklin. Meryl and I had the pleasure of interacting 2 weeks ago now, Meryl, with his. I think Mr. Waters said he was his last student. Dr. Waters said he was John Hope Franklin's last student, if I'm not mistaken. So, John Hope Franklin was an outstanding historian who wrote a lot of good works, taught for many years, so he was a tome of information and critical thoughts concerning America's history. So I'll end with him speaking on the importance of history. He's speaking specifically on the subject matter of affirmative action, but you'll get what you need from that clip, I'm certain. But for now, let's start with us in this space. And if you have given it any thought, I'll start with the topic, and we'll see where we go from there, because I have a couple questions. But if you've given it any thought, we'll start there. Hey, Don, always good to see you. Got to get you back in here soon. So, if you have a thought on it, why do you think our collective history matters? If you can unpack it, unpack it. If not, feel free to personalize it. I think that's a way of processing this too. Something that came to mind when I was thinking about this topic, or how to communicate this topic, was Ella Baker. Ella Baker was a civil rights activist. She had connections. I think she graduated from Shaw, if I'm not mistaken. But she had significant presence in the civil rights movement. She was critical of leaders. She was very outspoken, and for all intents and purposes, she was a well-known woman who had a lot to say about matters concerning getting fairness and justice uh, accomplished. for Black Americans. So she used to say, based on this biography I read some years ago, I think the author's name was Ransby. She wrote a book about Ella Baker's civil rights participation. But she said that Ella Baker, even up until the later years of her life, when I think she was battling dementia or something, her main point of introduction to anyone or starting a conversation was, who your people? That's how she would introduce her. She would interact with people. She would say, who your people? Because she was trying to make connections that would help her better understand who she was encountering, who this person was attached to, and how she could say, okay, if you are related to this person or that person, then I can get a better understanding of who you are. Why? Because I have context for where you come from, what your origin story is. I relate that type of thinking to us better understanding who we are as a nation collectively. And we have to look at this through a collective lens. So who your people can apply to anything and everything concerning your origin story and what kind of frames who you are. But as a historian, I look at it as a collective. Who are our people? What makes us who we are as a country, who we claim to be as a country, and how do we get there better? And that's acknowledging our collective history. Okay, we're gonna stop rambling. Gonna come around and see if you guys have thoughts on why our collective history matters. We'll talk some more after we go around and just continue to unpack the ideas around it. But again, you can personalize it or you can take it as I mean, the whole collective. Mel, you're a UNC grad, so I'm going to come to you first. What are your thoughts on our collective history and why it matters?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting. I never really gave it much thought until like I was thinking about it and you were talking about it today. I mean, I think it just, to me, probably boils down to like two things. Like collective history builds citizenship to me. I think understanding understanding things from like different perspectives and other people's perspectives helps you like kind of build relations to work forward. It gives you insight on like current day problems. I think it's important for us as a culture to not take things on face value, man. You know, I think sometimes we tend to just take things on face value and don't ask why. And one thing I'm probably starting to ramble too, but what you made me think about, Felton, you were talking a little bit about collective history and why it's important is Stokely Carmichael. I was watching this old show on this old TV show called Soul, and it was interviewing a bunch of folks, and he was saying 10 years after Martin Luther King was assassinated, he had a very different perspective about the civil rights movement. That it wasn't, if he had it to retell, it wouldn't be necessarily folks trying to integrate into a society. It was more about telling the powers that be, you can't restrict my movement, which is deep. And I think like hearing those stories and thinking about things differently from the way that it was told to you in a book and being open to, understand other people's culture. I just think it just helps us build citizenship. So
that's a wonderful citation in my mind for this conversation. Stokely Carmichael, or Kwame Ture, I think is what he changed his name to later. He is at the same time. He's a contemporary of other civil rights leaders, and there's this complete and total need for that wrestling to take place, for those views to be understood as having taken place at the same time under the same circumstances. Everybody that talks to me long enough knows that I always bring up that Benjamin Banneker wrote to Thomas Jefferson. We can't have these separate lines of thought. Our collective history matters. It doesn't mean that Stokely Carmichael and John Lewis were supposed to always agree and get along. And one of my biggest hangups of the last couple of years, I don't know if you guys remember, but I had a real significant issue with the way former President Bill Clinton spoke at John Lewis's funeral when he was saying where SNCC was going, and we were glad. Well, it was unfortunate that Stokely took the leadership and blah, blah, blah. And he was speaking of Stokely Carmichael in a way that, and in the space at John Lewis's funeral, that was denigrating to Stokely Carmichael in his attempt to elevate John Lewis. Mm-hmm. But they didn't have that type of contentious relationship. They had different opinions on how to handle the civil rights struggle. But this guy trying to elevate another guy misses the bigger picture of what was being dealt with at that time. And just because there was conflicting streams of thoughts or ideas about how to handle it, that he was out of place for doing it. He was out of pocket for doing that. So anyway, that's a great observation. That's exactly how I mean it, man. There's processes and things that are worth observing as a collective, and we get better for it. It's important that we acknowledge that we benefit from looking at this collectively. Did you have more you want to say before we move on?
No, I mean, one more thing I would just kind of add is like just even thinking about like chattel slavery, and like I'm having a hard time making this connection, but like in school, and I think most people kind of learned about slave trade as it was like strictly in North America, and like having this understanding about like the large scores of Africans that were in South America, which builds this other connection between these folks that you don't think that you have a natural connection to, right? If you don't dig deeper. So like that's another piece where it's just like our collective histories like show like these places where there's connections that we didn't realize. So
absolutely. And what drives such a tremendous movement of people, the institution of slavery, to repopulate and remake other parts of the world. I mean, there's the presence of Africans in this hemisphere in mass because of the translated slave trade. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack and wrestle with there, but that's the thing. It's all connected. Bob, what are your thoughts? Why our collective history matters?
You and I talk about this all the time. History is history. And history is fact as best we can understand based upon documentation and tradition and oral tradition and all of that sort of thing. If we don't talk history, we don't talk truth. If we don't talk truth, we have no foundation on which to operate. And in many ways, it seems that we're getting further and further away from a willingness to talk truth. And the only way to restore that is to be true about history. And that's the only way to really restore that. I use the term we're a nation of myth and delusion all the time, because we are. And we include things, we leave things out. We won't heal. We won't be able to actually constructively move forward until we're truthful, until we anchor ourselves in history and make decisions that will move us differently, move us consistent with, you talk to 10 different people and you get 12 different understandings or interpretations of what this country is about to begin with. That's not something that you can work with. You just simply can't work with that. And I was listening to a guy a couple of nights ago running for political office talking about how we were founded to be a Christian nation. We were founded on Christian principles, and we were founded on men and women being men and women, and that there are only two kinds of people, men and women. And, you know, I'm listening to all this and I'm like, you know, it seems to me that we were founded to have a collection of principles and values that were good for public policy, and that within which people had the freedom to believe this or that, do this or that, whatnot, as long as it was not outside the boundaries of these public policy constraints. It was, and yet we have no semblance of that in this nation today. But we're not going to get back. We're not going to get to any semblance of that, I don't believe, without accepting the fact that we got to be honest about history. We've got to be honest about. We've got to talk about truth. And all of these efforts in the Republican Party and other initiatives to block that, to control the stories that are told and control the stories that aren't told, that's not going to take us anywhere but down. I think we're at a place culturally where the mainstream people, I think, are ready to have those conversations. I don't think the structure is ready, and we got to break through that.
So critically important, one of the last words you said in the structure, and I think I interpret much of what you're saying about the importance of history being wrestled with from the perspective of how healthy it is to be truthful in our society, and it's foundational. It's better for that structure if it has a stronger, more solid foundation, and you only get that being honest about what's taking place in the space that you're trying to discuss.
That's right. Our responsibility isn't to like history. Our responsibility is to know it.
Yep.
And then we can move from it. If we don't like it, we can embrace it and move into it if we like it. But we can't do any of that if we're not honest about it to start with. And
Yep.
so we've got to be tough enough to look at it in its face.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a well-constructed statement, and that's exactly what we're here to discuss. What's going on, Jay? Just to catch you up and give you something to be thinking about as I call on Lisa and Greg and Julia. The question is the topic. Why does our collective history matter? So if you could begin processing what that means, and you can personalize and make it subjective, but just the rhythm of the conversation is just that right now, why it matters. And if you can articulate that, great. So I'll come to you lastly. Lisa, what are your thoughts? Why does collective history matter?
First, I love the topic as usual. I think it matters because the culmination of previous events, i.e. history, it exacts present day. So for a metaphor, for a tangible item that when I explain this after this show, I'll say there can be no cell phone except for the advent of a car phone. So the progression of things. So history matters to understand the progression of things and then to think more forwardly. Also, for me, history matters so I can assess the movements I make now based on successful previous experiences and the unsuccessful experiences. So I was talking to my first husband earlier today, and I think you guys know or can recall that my daughter, who was dealing with breast cancer some years ago, apparently she's got some more health challenges, and we have a contentious relationship. So my ex-husband was like, you need to talk to Jessica. You need to talk to da, 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 da. And so I paused and I said, okay, this is what our relationship has been like for over 30 years. And I said, Arthur, this is not successful. You can't bully me, right? And this is what this is. Yelling at me, this is not helpful. But if I didn't take the pause and say, because I would have just snapped right back and did what we did, da 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 da. But to have an instant rewind of how our relationship has been, I can't do what I've done before and just hang up or just disengage. No, Siri's hearing me. Or disengage or anything like that. But if I did not recall the history of our 30 plus years, that would have kept me from actually finding out what it is you really want me to know. And that's why I had to stop, let him finish what he was doing for a second. And then I said, I need you to pause. And I said, we can't do this. This doesn't work with me, right? You can't bully me. You can't yell at me, da, da, da. Is there something you want me to know about our child? So that's the aspect of the history that helps me be able to move better in spaces that I'm very uncomfortable even moving in, but for the greater good, if that makes sense.
No, that's a solid and wonderful example. It is very personal, very much subjective and personalized, but that our history is your husband's and yours and your daughter's to some measure, even inside of that, because that's a big picture moment. And for you to process all of that and understand, no matter how much your past may indicate your action is to hang up or just completely run from the conversation, there's also your daughter's current disposition that has to be considered. And inside of you, you going back over your collective history with your husband or your ex-husband, you get to say, wait a minute, there's room for improvement in this relationship or this interaction if I observe these things have taken place. We that's the way we can talk about this topic. Subjective to yourself, or broadly to our nation's history, or even to the global history. But that is perfect, and that's well said and well articulated. I'm glad that the topic resonates. Gregory and Julia, what are your thoughts on why our collective history matters?
Thank you, Felton. And Lisa, thank you. I think I'm going to go down a personal track as well. I'd like to set aside a little bit, if it's all right, Felton, the question why collective history matters, and make it a little more personal. I loved history, always did, always will. History to me is storytelling. It's storytelling. And stories lead to relationships, most important. And when we find that, we find the big picture. We're able to follow the string from connection to connection to connection, relationships, the human story. So to make it personal and current, we had a piece of furniture delivered here a week ago, last week. And I'm going to tell the story. So these two guys come, two black gentlemen in a big truck on our narrow little road. And I'm an old truck driver. I see their plight. I see what they're going to be involved in. I empathize. Also, by experience, I know what they're going to be dealing with.
Based on your past history.
Based on my past history. There we go, making connections. So I'm out of the house. I'm out there helping guide the truck. And now everybody's out of the truck and we're talking, and the gentleman who is the lead driver, Antonio, we're talking about his day, how many stops he had, where they're going from there. But then I learned one of the things I always ask people is, where are they from? Sense of place. The place matters.
Who are your people?
Who are your people? So he says, well, I'm from Cleveland. I said, I'm from Parma Heights, Ohio, suburb of Cleveland. He says, I'm from Parma Heights. My sister still lives there. My aunt still lives there. In fact, they come back and forth between, and he says, Chicago. I said, Chicago? I'm from Chicago. My family grew up in Chicago. We moved from Parma Heights, Ohio, to Chicago. They were so excited. They went from 2 guys with 15 stops, heavy furniture, appliances, just trying to get the job done, to relationship, to history, a common history. That's personal, and I believe that's where it matters. And I believe that's where evolution, you mentioned the word evolution, Felton. I believe that's where we can be better people and grow, by taking the time, finding those connections, and hearing those stories, that history.
And the genuine interest. And for the rest of the story, he was going to come to Sugar Valley today, and we were going to help him get started on his own business, because he could easily do what he's doing on his own and make a lot more money. He could be a contract. Anyway, that's another side. But I really related to, well, what everybody said, but I think the idea of collective history, and I never even heard of that term before. And so it caused thinking starting yesterday. And it seems like it helps us have a more completed point of view. To, I remember the story about, if you're an ant and you see where you are on an elephant, and you might think, oh, an elephant, depending on where you are, is this, or it's this, or it's this. But if you look from above or see a bigger picture, then we have a more completed point of view. And to what Bob said about truth, well, one person's truth may not be another person's truth. So learning people's perspectives is so different. I mean, I'm going to use my mother, my Southern Belle mother, who grew up with, she had a black mammy, and Archie took care of the house. And here she is, on Friday, she's so excited to meet, to have Felton come to lunch, or the TV personality. And, how much, also with history, people can change and grow and learn. But to Gregory's point, it's all about, to us, it's all about relationships and getting to know the person and see the soul, see the real person, not the colors.
That's the collective. That truth element that Bob's mentioning requires the collective. It requires so many different perspectives and so many different ideas about what's taking place. Now, that's going to make finding the truth either easier or more complicated based on what this person or that person or this other person are trying to get at or get something from. But we can more easily decipher when we look at the whole and the collective. Yeah, and that time spent with your mother was awesome. I wouldn't trade whatever makes her who she is for the world. She has always been a decent and genuine and kind person, and she has a decent and genuine and kind daughter that I appreciate. So though that collective experience of her life, no matter what the origin is, it's a part of her makeup and her composition, and we don't get what we have if she doesn't go through that or experience that or have that life. And what is her birthday? So it was 87. So that's a big long time to process and grow. And if you hear, as my grandmother used to say, you still should be learning. I'm always learning. That's what my grandma, I'm 90 years old. I'm still learning. So there you go. I appreciate that those comments. Jay Dwayne, do you have a why our collective history matters? Thought.
Whew. Everybody gave all these great points. How y'all doing this evening? I guess the only thing that I could think about is collective history matters more now than ever, is because we have placed so much value on perspective and intent, whereas collective history, leaning more to what Mr. Bob was saying, it is a point of truth, but I like to think of it more as it's a place of establishment. It's kind of like when people used to make covenants back in the day, they would write it down. And a lot of people don't know that's where blood covenants come from, is they would walk around in a circle, recite that covenant and say, you know, they'll cut open an animal and say, whatever happens to this animal will happen to this person who breaks this covenant. In a lot of our historic faith, it has always been, if you can't understand something, you go to the text and it's your point of reference. Right now, if we keep peeling back layers of history and basing it only on perspective, where is the point of reason? Where do we understand how we fit in the tapestry of life? You know, this is not so much about one individual or one ethnic group. This is really about humanity as a whole. And I think that sometimes we lose that. I work sometimes in DEI space, and they usually invite me in when people are not getting along. And one of the most recent one was some citizens were arguing about the name of a sign. And they were like, this sign is named after a Confederate soldier. It's offensive to Black people. No, most Black people know that the Confederacy happened in the South. That's not where the offense take place. The offense take place is what else happened at this time? And they're like, so that doesn't offend us, because you can take the sign down, but don't change the behavior. And so a lot of people don't understand that. When I walk in DEI space, white people sometimes get up and leave because they don't feel like they're a part of the DEI part when it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is happening because we have peeled back so much from history that we have now placed emphasis on ethnic groups, and people feel like they don't belong because they don't see their history. And so when you bring back the collective history, it is just going to be what it is. And it's going to show people, yes, your grandmother could have been a wonderful mother. She could have baked the best pies, but that still didn't take away the fact she helped lynch people. Several things can be true at the same time. You know, it's just like my dad was a horrible father, but he was the best uncle. I mean, my cousins got a fantastic uncle, but that doesn't take away from anything. He was just a horrible father, great uncle. He can be both of those things, and let's celebrate the fact that he was a great uncle. And I tell my cousins that they got the best part of him, and I'm not even jealous because somebody experienced that. And this is what we're doing. We're robbing people of an opportunity to experience when we leave out history and we only feel like certain parts of it is important. That's the part that we're missing, is the humaneness, really.
Oh my
Wonderful.
God.
I'm sorry. Lisa, go ahead. That was a good point of transition, but go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, but Jay Dwayne, oh my gosh, that was so profound. My best friend for over 30 years is the niece to my stepmother, who actually made me homeless at 17 and was neglectful of me as a child when she was married to my dad. And I actually get teary sometimes when she talks about how great her aunt was from the time she was born. And I say, how can this be the same person that neglected me but cared for you? But then I had to think, she also married my mother's father, my mother's husband, ex-husband. So she had something else in her mind that could have presented a barrier. So that history part, her story part, and the collective of those experiences. My best friend is her sister's daughter. So there wasn't a barrier to how much I could give to her. So that's how I've had to, oh my God, that was so profound. Thank you. You've helped add some more little pieces to that issue. And sometimes my best friend, she'll be like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you, because it is kind of painful, but we can have good conversations about that. But that was really profound, and thank you for that.
You want to add something about?
I've got to jump into that too if I
Yeah.
can.
I want to share something too after you say.
Okay. So to Jay Lane's comments and to Julia's, I think true. I have a hard time with people with the phrase people have different truths, because I think truth is truth, and I think perspective is different, but truth is truth. And so we need to share perspective so we can then build a bigger picture of what truth really is. And to Lisa's comment and what Jay Wayne's, my father was not a good father to me. He was a great grandfather to my sons, and that was very redemptive for me, because he loved my sons and he loved them unconditionally. It doesn't change the fact that he wasn't, for me, a good father, but it's, again, two different realities of associated with the same truth. And when you look at something from this angle or from this angle, you're seeing the same thing. You're seeing it differently, though. So your perspective is different. The truth, though, is still the truth. And so the more we can talk about full history, the more we get the 360-degree perspective on what truth is. And it ceases to be about individual perspective, and it becomes global truth.
Collective. I totally agree, Meryl. 1 second, because
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, Bob knows that I stand on that, and if you spend any time with me, I stand on that too. When we're just having a discussion, and one of our common friends and I had this significant back and forth about, when people say my truth, that's highly problematic. But I interpret what Julia says, I think, in the way that Bob does. That perspective, that collective, that part matters. Everybody's experience is going to be different. Perspective exactly is the right term. But yeah, man, when it comes to truth, there's not much discussion when it comes to somebody, especially when they say my truth. I almost want to run from them. Go ahead, Meryl.
Well, I mean, but this ties into this whole conversation. I mean, like, I think what happens is that when people are talking about the truth, they're not talking about something that's transactional. They're talking about perspective. And then I think that's what the issue is. I think, just like you said, Bob, like a transactional thing that happened can't be debated. It's like a scientific formula or a math equation. And I think, and of course, we're conditioned to think either or instead of both and we don't tend to deal with things in spectrums. But I think where the fundamental problem is there are arguments about something being true that is really a perspective, if that makes sense. Like, I think that's where our big arguments are. Like, somebody's like, well, this is the truth because this is what happened during civil rights. It was this during civil rights. And like, well, that's not a transactional thing. That's your perspective. And that's where you have the leeway to say my truth, your truth, somewhere in the middle. And that's where issues is. I don't think people, well, I'll take that back. There are people who debate certain things that are written down, documented. So let me take that back.
Yeah, there's a contingency that watches a lot of news on a channel that's named after an animal. That's where a lot of that comes from. There's a lot of conjecture that just runs rapid, and it becomes truth, my truth, your truth, all that stuff.
Tell me this, Felton. Look, this is just a way out of control, and though. But think also, so Adolf Hitler, right? Let's say he spends 20 years after the atrocities, and he sees the light, and he has a 20-year career of atoning for. Yeah, I'm being extreme, but like this whole conversation about like, if a majority of your life you were just a horrible, reprehensible person, and then like you see the light and you're redeemed, like you're good at that point. But like, were you a good person? It's just we have to, it's complex. But
So he's critically important, and based on you bringing up Adolf Hitler, there's, you know, if you're a person that participated by any measure in the Holocaust, you're still getting prosecuted now. That's how much it's understood.
Right.
Don't matter what you've been doing for the last 70 years, as how great a person you are. If you participated by any measure, they still looking for you and they still willing to prosecute.
Right.
I would love for some of that energy to be reflected in some of the atrocities visited upon Black Americans. There's plenty of pictures. Jay Dwayne made a comment about, you know, grandma might have been at the lynching. There's plenty of pictures. Hell, there was a whole business around postcards, memorabilia being sold, and it was lynching. It was Black men primarily being tortured, brutalized, and murdered, and they were sending this stuff on postcards like it was, you know, Christmas related or something. And that stuff exists. There's a book that I have called "Lynching: An American Spectacle." We should be just as adamant about going back and getting those prosecutions taken care of, if you ask me. But we're not.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There's just this history story. I think about like Thomas Jefferson, right? There's this story, this love story that's told about Thomas Jefferson selling. I mean, where he's constantly committing, you know, sexual assault. And like it's just this romanticism, right? And it's like you learn this one thing, and then there's horrible other parts of it. But go ahead, sorry.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's why context matters, and that's why the collective matters. I totally get that. Go ahead, Jay.
Oh no, I was going to say I agree. The same thing. Matter of fact, that's what we teach our organization, is that truth is truth, and everybody's truth is the same truth. You may not know it's the truth, but truth is irrefutable. And I don't even go down the rabbit hole of perspective, because perspective can be influenced by emotions, or your perspective can influence your emotions. So I stay away from that. I think that what has happened now, when we look at the social construct, perspective has become the precedence for what is history. And so people will take their perspective on this and then shape history to be that thing. And that's where we're losing people. And also, we also are losing our identity. Like I got several pet peeves, but one of my social pet peeves is how we are mixing race and ethnicity. And so now you have people who think that a race is an ethnicity, and they're slowly taking it out because that's changing history. And a lot of people who don't even think about it, there's so many things that we're missing because of perspective. And people say, oh, it's only a category. Yeah, but what is that category connected to? And by the category being connected, they're using social constructs to change our perception on things, which is now changing the history. That's why over time, Abraham Lincoln is getting lighter and lighter. That's why over time, everybody from Egypt is getting lighter and lighter. You know, these things are happening because our perspective is changing. And now people struggle to know the difference between fact and fiction, or my bad, embellishments. You know, so it's those things that we struggle with. And I think that that's why collective history is so important.
Yes. Well, good observations. That there's an authenticity that needs to be stuck to. We need to stick to when it comes to communicating some of these things. And whitewashing of history is nothing new. That's been going on for a very long time. Race is a social construct. It's one that America had a hand in making more firm than it ever should have been. So if you make it as significant as we have in this country, then we have to acknowledge and speak from that, based on its history, based on how impactful it has been to defining our collective history, defining our collective nature. So yeah, I acknowledge and adhere to discussions and ideas and conversations on race, because it has to be done in the place that we live, under the banner that we live. You got, okay, Bob, make a quick comment, because I want to get to this clip, and then I want us to say our last words. Go ahead.
To what you just said, history includes all kinds of prominent people, influential people, lying and telling wrong things about things like race. And until we acknowledge that and bring that forward, how do we undo all this sort of stuff? Again, the intentionality and the broad spectrum construction of this wrong story is embedded in our history, and it's got to be eradicated, or we will never go where we need to go.
Absolutely. And Ajane, because you slid in under the tag, I'm going to make sure you get the last word, but it's going to be on the other side of this clip. We're speaking about why collective history matters. It's been personalized, made subjective. It's to the bigger observation of how it makes us potentially get to where we say we want to go. It's a positive energy that can be had when we look at history collectively and see the benefits. I'm going to play a clip of John Hope Franklin speaking about affirmative action. And just keep in mind with how we're speaking about collective history and why it matters, and take what you can from it. And on the other side of it, I'm going to fly around the room for some final thoughts. And Ajane, because you got here, and I always welcome you into any space I occupy, you'll get the last words of articulation. Just keep them concise, because we try to get out of here about 8. But I think we'll maximize it. Just be processing all you need to process and getting them words together. So here is the clip, and I think you guys will rather enjoy it in the shadow of what we've been discussing. I think it's very valid for this.
Were you surprised that so many of those young people that you talked to did not believe, for instance, in the need for affirmative action?
Because they don't first, young people don't know their history, and this is one of the things I'm trying. They don't know that we've had 300 years of affirmative action, but on the other side, the woman who writes to me and tells me that her people came from Europe in 1906, and that look where they are now, look what they have been able to do. And I say, in 1906, I wrote it back in 1906, blacks were being hammered and beaten in the riot of Atlanta, in the race riot in Atlanta, and that there was a long period of affirmative action for her and her people that placed her at a remarkable advantage, that she could go and did go to the University of Oklahoma, no questions asked, where my father was paying taxes, and I couldn't even go into the town at night, to say nothing of school day and day. Now, I don't know how many people realize that this has been going on, and that this affirmative action is nothing new, nothing new. Privilege, power, influence, and right in this country has been the possession, the sole possession of white people for 300 years.
Does it not worry you that so many young people are now don't know their history?
It does worry me. That's where I work. That's where I work. That's where I'm working. That's why I'm working. To try to teach them what it is they're trying to figure about. And they're so pitifully ignorant, many of them, that they add to the problem. They don't have to solve the problem. They add to it in their abysmal ignorance. They can't even inform themselves. There's nothing up there. Don't pay attention to what the situation is.
And what's going to happen? What are the consequences for us as people, as a country, if they don't learn?
We won't make any progress. If the consequences, if they don't learn, the consequences are dire and bad. And the opponents of affirmative action and all the other steps that we've sought to make racial equality in this country a reality be for naught.
Were you surprised?
Yeah, so I think that's very applicable to the way that I'm trying to engage in this conversation about collective history. I wanted to say this at some point during this discussion, so I'll say it, and then as I stated, just fly around the space and we'll land with Ms. Willis at the end to give us some final words. But while on that visit in Charleston, a lot was discussed about bricks. When we were at Fort Sumter, the bricks that we used to build Fort Sumter, at Drayton Hall, the bricks that we used to build. So the bricks are made locally, and on the bricks, if you look hard enough, you can see fingerprints. You can see tiny fingerprints. The task of the enslaved children was to turn the bricks during the drying process. That comes to us in context. It's undeniable. They were there. That's the collective history. That acknowledgement must be made, no matter what's lacking, no matter if you don't have historical documents out the yin yang that tell you every meticulous thing. It was illegal for enslaved people to read or write, so you're going to be lacking. But how significant is it that those bricks are able to tell us a little something? And that's a part of that structure that we were discussing a moment ago. That's a part of that foundation. That's a part of that hard truth. So that's collective. That's understanding what collective history is. So brief statements from folks. I know you don't mind spending the time with me, and I don't mind spending it with you, but we're gonna fly around the space and get a couple of closing remarks, and again, we'll land on Miss Willis, and I'll call you out. Beryl, go for it.
All right, real quick, I appreciate you sharing that. I had a couple observations about Dr. Franklin. He in a roundabout way, he told that story without specifically saying people who identify as white. It's just really interesting to me, context, survival. People are still afraid to say that about whiteness out loud. And I think he's a few hundred years off. I think affirmative action has been happening ever since 1640, when John Punch was, sent to, lifetime servitude for, by law in Virginia for committing what was a crime at the time to two other folks who identified as white. That's the beginning of it, and it started there, and it still happens. So that's it.
Appreciate that nugget. Yeah, John Punch ran off from indentured servitude with some white guys, but the judge sentenced him to a lifetime of servitude, making him a slave. Bob, go for it.
Very quickly, I think the guy's right. We've got 400 years of affirmative action in the other direction. That's truth.
Lisa, go for it.
Well, I'll co-sign what everybody's saying. History is history. The truth is the truth. But I do believe in perspective. And if you keep a narrow perspective and stay closed, then you don't understand the difference between perspective and truth.
That's when you start saying, my truth, my truth. Gotcha. That's not what we like. We don't like that here. Gregory and Julia, go for it. What you got?
We're just so grateful for this conversation. And yes, perspective, not my truth. Perspective.
Thank you. Thank you. Greg, I'll take that as a significant cosign, my man. There's the thumb. That's what I look for sometimes. Yeah, I got you. Appreciate you, man. Jay Dwayne, what's your closing remarks?
I of course I would agree with him. I think, yeah, I agree with everything. The only thing that I would add to that is I wouldn't worry about the next generation of Blacks or anyone, because they have proven that they paid attention and they are building a legacy and they are making an impact. It's just not done the way we thought it would be. But I don't have any fear that they're losing any history, losing any knowledge. They're showing that they're here to stay.
Yeah, I think I might have been, we both may have been somewhere in that realm when he was actually making those statements. So we're carrying on some of that work and legacy. So appreciate that. And I know this young lady is. So Ajane, get us out of here with whatever your final thoughts are on why collective history matters.
First, I want to say thank you all for letting me into the space that you've already solidified. I was rushing home because Felton, I gave you my word, and I'm always very thankful when y'all invite me into the space. So thank you. I will make two very brief points about collective history. First, I will address the so-called ivory tower. Historians have to collect as a collective. We're in a space right now where at tier one institutions and predominantly white institutions, people are publishing in a way that is ignoring other groups of scholars' work. I'm talking about decades and hundreds of years worth of work. And that's a piece of the privilege that proves what privilege is. That privilege is the lack of a barrier right there. It's not money, it's not anything like that. It's the lack of that barrier that you can publish something in spite of not having worked with a full collective of scholars that have written their own history. And so we have many histories that are written bottom up histories and even top down about folks in power that were written beside the collective, because you had the money, because you had the privilege, because of white supremacy that has been allowed and disallowed with certain groups. Historians must write and produce history as a collective. Otherwise, we're 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 brains are better than one, especially when you're trying to stand in as a bridge for other people's history. You have to take personal responsibility when you're writing about something you have not experienced, and you have to write as a collective. And that's our responsibility. If we're going to tell a full story, we have to write fully as a collective. As it goes for folks outside of academia, I don't like, the social hierarchy or anything like that. And people have to collect their own history as a collective. We have to get neighborhood museums back. There are some communities that don't want their trinkets or what have you that are politically disenfranchised, and even several white ethnic groups that don't want their personal and spiritual intellectual property housed in a space outside of their community. We have to respect that. We have to allow communities of all kinds to continue to collect their history as their own collective. If they don't want scholars in the mix, they don't want scholars in the mix, and we have to respect that. And finally, we have to teach history as a collective. We're living in a time where everything is so politicized, it's not even funny. History is something that is foundational for every field. It's something that's foundational for us as a nation. And in order to move forward, we got to learn history collectively. We have to teach it. We have to produce our own histories as a collective. It has to happen. We have seen where the division has gotten us for 400 years. And so I push back against folks trying to collect certain types of history more than others. We have to get all of it, and we got to do it all together. And of course, that perspective matters. Everything deserves to be put in context, but we have to collect all of these histories as a collective. And third, I said I was going to make 2 points, but one more, y'all, because this is important. I just want to put on the record that the falsification of oral history as an illegitimate source in academia was designed to keep Black scholars from writing their own history. It was even designed from keeping poor whites entering into the academy to write their own history. Elitist structures and people who are in power illegitimized oral history because they don't want people to be able to tell their own story. Okay, and so we have to get past that as well. There is no power in telling someone else's story for them. And so, as scholars and as other people that are consumers of history, we have to do everything as a collective, down from producing primary sources to recording histories from the top, right? Histories of presidents and different things like that. Nothing is out of bounds. That's the very essence of history. Everything has to be done that way and in that order. Thank you all for giving me the grace to add on, even after everything you all have put out in the space.
Ajane, I appreciate your presence, and yeah, I think it's mentioned in your reference in the WPA recordings from the 1930s, I believe. Formerly enslaved people made recordings that were lesser utilized by historians because there's no way there could be some people, they're too old, that they couldn't remember that well. And one of their favorite things was how distrustful they were of these white people coming onto their property and recording what they were saying. But if you listen to them, it's undeniable. There's a lot of stuff that's undeniable. Well stated. I cringe at the fact that, put that back up, that politicians are attempting to erase history that they are uncomfortable with. Indeed. That's exactly the energy behind some of this stuff. I just wanted to say lastly, I truly appreciate you all being in this space. And for totality of our conversation, it's simply you can't have this without that. And that's history, good, bad, or ugly. And whatever the outcome of this is you can't have it without that. So if we keep ignoring it, if we keep turning a blind eye, if we don't wrestle with it in context and collectively, then what we get, this we get, yeah, we kind of deserve it. So I appreciate you all. As always, have a wonderful evening. Thanks for spending the time. Grown Folks Business is your show, and I'm glad to